My name is Keidi Anderson, and I'm currently a sixth grade teacher at Rafiki School in Moscow, Idaho. I know about the Rafiki Foundation because I lived at the Rafiki village in Uganda for 4 years. My parents were involved in BSF, Bible Study Fellowship, when me and my siblings were born, were small. So we're from Washington State originally, and they were both going to BSF, and then Rafiki came to give a presentation about what they were doing in Africa while they were there. So both my parents heard about this ministry. They weren't in the same room at the time. And my mom just says, she felt like God was saying, I have this for you someday. They were both kind of struck by Rafiki, and they came back together after the presentation, and were just like, yeah, this sounds like a really cool ministry. But both of them were kind of thinking, this is something we're going to do when we retire. When our kids are grown and out of the house, we'll go over to Africa for a little bit and see what this is about. So they had signed up for one of Rafiki's mailing lists and didn't really think much about it until my mom got a flyer in the mail from Rafiki saying that they were looking for medical providers to come serve overseas. And my dad's a physician assistant, and so he works in family practice medicine. And she just says, she looks at the flyer and goes, does God want us to do this now? I think my youngest sister had just been born. 4 kids under the age of 6 at the time. And they started praying a lot about it. They ended up going down to the Rafiki home office for training, and we're just really impressed with the ministry. But then when they heard how much money they were going to have to raise to take a family of 6 over to Africa, I think their mouths just dropped open. They're like, okay, that's way too much money. I don't know if we can do this. And Rosemary Jensen was sitting across the table from them at the time. And she just looked at them and said, if God wants you in Africa, he can raise the money just like that. And so they were both like, okay, I think we're going to try to do this. And within the course of the year, they started speaking at different churches, and the money was raised for us to go overseas. So August 2006, my family moved over to the Rafiki village in Uganda. 4 kids. We were 8, 6, 4, and 2 when they moved us overseas. And then we lived there for 4 years. I was ages 6 through 10 while I lived over there, and so I was able to slip right into the Rafiki School when we moved there. The oldest resident kids on site were my age, and so I basically did 1st through 5th grade over in Uganda, and it was a great experience. I loved having so many different friends that lived right next door. There were 100 resident kids on site when we lived there, and so I had tons of friends to play with. I loved the sunny days. I loved the thunderstorms and the hard rain on the metal roofs, and we collected rainwater. When it would come off the roof, we put buckets underneath and collected all the used, and it was a wonderful experience. I loved seeing monkeys right outside our house, and it was great to grow up over there. I returned to the Rafiki village, Uganda, last summer, 2023. That was my first time back in 13 years. And basically, as soon as we moved back home to the States, I knew I wanted to go back. I'd made such great friends over there, and had initially thought, okay, just in a couple years, I'll go back and see them again. But then you get caught up with life back here in the States, and I was involved in school and working and saving up money to go to college. And so eventually that window of me going back to see my classmates had passed. But I still wanted to go back. The Rafiki village was still such a home to me. I know I want to go back and I want to see this again. So I finished college. I got my first job working at Logos. And then my mom sent me this email that came through from Rafiki saying that they were looking for classical Christian educators to go do a short-term mission trip overseas. And so that sort of re-sparked the interest again, and I started saving up money for it. And then went back last summer with my dad. My dad accompanied me. I was over there for a month, And I mean, words just can't describe how amazing it was to like step off the plane, to see all the sights again, to have the smells come back. And it felt like home. And a lot had changed in the last 13 years, but there were certain things that were just exactly the same. The old red dirt bumpy road on the way to Rafiki was exactly the same. You know, the road in the middle of the village was much smaller than I'd remembered, but I'm older now. But it was overwhelming. It was such a special time. And then to see all the resident kids come out and say hi to them again and put names to faces, and everybody's grown up now, and see some of the mamas again was very, very special. And then to be able to help out in the school as well. So I did a lot of, I did some teacher training. I worked with a couple of fourth grade teachers on my last trip over there. So I'd sit in on their classes, I'd give them feedback, I taught some sample lessons for them, we looked at curriculum together, those sorts of things. But it's just so fun to go into those classrooms again and tell the students sitting there, you know, like, I went to school here, I sat in those seats, I've done what you're doing right now. And they think that's pretty strange to have a white girl over there saying that she's learned in the Rafiki School too. If I was to give advice to families considering raising their kids overseas, I'd say, you know, definitely do it. My parents got a lot of comments saying that they were crazy for moving over to Africa with 4 small kids. And they knew that it was a big leap of faith as well. But it was probably one of the best things that could have happened for my family. We grew so close together in our time over there, just because we spent so much time together. And there were less extracurricular activities for me and my siblings to get plugged into. So we were home as a family every night, spent a lot of time together. And just that, I love telling my parents' story because that one act of faith, them moving us overseas, has really set up the rest of my life. Because when we were over in Africa, that's the first time we heard about this thing called classical Christian education. When my parents were moving us back to the States, they knew that they wanted us to be in a classical Christian school, and so they were touring different schools in the area. That's what brought us to Moscow, Idaho. And I've had such an amazing education because of that, going to Logos School, going to New St. Andrews College. So I mean, the rest of my life has been orchestrated because we were over in Africa. And I think that that's so special and neat. And yeah, I wouldn't trade anything for the world. I love Uganda. I love the people over there. It's been a very special place for me.